Chapter 1. Normal Life or Beautiful Lie? 12 years. That's how long Lucas Carlisle had been married to Grace. A dozen anniversaries, 2 children, countless shared memories, and a life that, on the surface, looked nearly perfect. He stood in the kitchen of their upscale home in Ridgewood Heights, sipping black coffee from a worn stainless steel mug that had survived firefights and surveillance ops across 4 continents. He glanced around at the spotless granite counters, the family photos lining the hallway, the scent of lavender from the diffuser she always kept in the living room. It was peaceful, still, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His phone buzzed on the countertop. A security alert from one of his clients. He'd take care of that later. He was a respected private security consultant now, no longer chasing shadows overseas or intercepting cartel smugglers. Domestic work, risk analysis, executive protection. Clean, smart, quiet. Just like Grace wanted. He walked over to the dining table and sat down, listening to the faint sound of the kids upstairs. Their daughter, Alyssa, 10, would be brushing her hair like Grace had taught her, long, even strokes. Their son, Mason, 7, would still be trying to finish his cereal without spilling half of it on his shirt. Lucas smiled faintly. The front door opened. Grace walked in wearing a tailored white blazer and her signature black heels. Hair perfect, makeup flawless. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a real estate magazine, and, truthfully, she had been once. "Morning," she said curtly, dropping her keys in the crystal dish without looking at him. "You were out early," Lucas said, keeping his tone casual. "Client meeting in Midtown," she replied, shrugging off her blazer. It was scheduled last minute. He nodded. She didn't meet his eyes. She used to, he thought. She used to walk through that door smiling, eyes lighting up when she saw him. She'd kiss his cheek, drop her bag, and talk about her day, her clients, her ideas. But now her words were clinical, polished, controlled, like she was managing a negotiation, not a marriage. "You didn't come to bed until almost 2 last night," he said casually. "I was working in the study," she said. "You were asleep. Didn't sound like work. I heard you laughing." She hesitated for a second. It was a video call with Colin. "We were reviewing development numbers from that new condo project. You know how ridiculous he gets when he's tired." Lucas murmured. "Ridiculous." He took another sip of coffee. She crossed her arms. "Are you implying something?" "No," he leaned back, studying her. "Just observing." Her phone buzzed in her purse. She quickly reached in, glanced at the screen, and silenced it. Lucas caught a flash of a name, Colin Mercer. She turned away, heading toward the stairs. He didn't follow her. The truth was, Lucas had been noticing the shift for months. It started small. A missed dinner here. A sudden weekend trip there. Once she'd come home from a conference in Chicago with perfume on her jacket he didn't recognize, floral, expensive, not her usual scent. She brushed it off, said it was from sitting next to a vendor on the plane. Then there were the late-night texts. Once, 1:14 a.m., her phone had lit up on the nightstand. Lucas, who slept lightly by habit, opened one eye. He hadn't touched it, but he saw the preview. "Colin, still thinking about earlier. You make business so damn fun." Grace had rolled over, pulling the phone under her pillow. Lucas had said nothing. He wasn't a jealous man. In his line of work, jealousy was a liability. But he was trained to read patterns, spot anomalies, recognize when something was off. And Grace, his Grace, was acting like a different person entirely. It wasn't just Colin. It was her sudden secrecy, the hidden folders on her laptop, the new bank account statements that started arriving addressed only to her. The kids mentioned her being busy a lot, and how Uncle Colin had picked them up from school once when she forgot. Lucas never forgot anything. One evening a few weeks earlier, he'd been watching Grace from the upstairs balcony as she sat in the garden, talking on her phone. He'd zoomed in on her with a small surveillance monocular, habit, really, and read her lips. "Don't worry," she said softly. "He won't see it coming. The papers are almost ready. My mom's pulling strings. We're covered." Lucas had frozen. He remembered how calm she looked. Relaxed. As if destroying their marriage and appending their family was a real estate deal she was closing over cocktails. He didn't confront her. He didn't storm down there in rage. Instead, he'd walk to his office, closed the door, and unlocked his secure server. If they wanted to play games, he'd play chess. He'd been patient, observant. He started collecting, logging, tracking. Every move, every call, every financial trail. Grace didn't know who she was trying to outsmart. Now, back in the present, Lucas stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the hallway mirror. He looked at himself. Same short-cropped hair, same square jaw, same cold, analytical eyes that once read people's motives like open books. A little more gray now, a little older, but still sharp, still dangerous. He thought back to a conversation years ago, shortly after leaving the field. Grace had said, "I love that you're done with all that spy stuff. It's time to just be normal." Lucas had agreed. He'd wanted that. The house, the kids, the quiet life. But as he stood there, watching Grace's reflection reappear at the top of the stairs with her phone glued to her ear and her voice drifting into another whispered conversation, the question struck him hard. Had any of this ever been normal? Or was it always a beautiful lie? His gut twisted, not from pain, but from clarity. Something was very wrong, and it was time to find out just how deep it went. Chapter 2. The Truth Behind the Smile. Lucas Carlisle didn't rush. He never had, not in combat zones, not while dismantling corporate espionage schemes, and certainly not in this. Patience was a weapon. Rushing led to errors, and errors in his line of work meant death, or worse. In this case, it would mean losing everything he'd built, everything he cared about. So he moved slowly, carefully. The moment Grace's behavior tipped from suspicious to calculated, Lucas had flipped a mental switch. His instincts, dulled by years of domestic life, flared awake like they'd never left. He wasn't just a security consultant. He'd spent over a decade in private intelligence, operating under levels of secrecy most civilians couldn't fathom. And Grace? She was operating like a rookie. She never saw it coming. 3 days after she brushed off his concerns with a perfunctory, "You're being paranoid," Lucas, he installed the first listening device. A 1/4-inch black mic, barely thicker than a paperclip, tucked inside a ceiling vent in her home office. She always took her late-night business calls in there. It was the most secure room in the house, or so she thought. The second bug went into her car, hidden behind the climate control panel. The third in the designer handbag she used most often. A lipstick-sized tracker embedded inside a dummy perfume bottle he'd placed near the mirror. He didn't just monitor her. He studied her. Lucas watched Grace's routes from the GPS logs, followed her stops from traffic cam scrapes, and built a timeline. She told him she had a weekly client meeting every Thursday in a luxury suite downtown. She even left printed schedules in the kitchen like a dutiful wife trying to maintain transparency. Only, there were no clients at the Fairmont Grand. There was Colin Mercer. Colin, her sleek, charming business partner. The man Lucas once welcomed into his home for dinner, who had toasted his birthday, played backyard football with his kids, and smiled into group selfies like family. Lucas reviewed the camera feed, low-res footage from the suite's hallway camera that he managed to access using a network exploit. He watched Grace step into the suite in a tight red dress, notepad in hand, playing the part. An hour later, she and Colin were kissing against the elevator door. Lucas didn't flinch. He just stared. Later that night, while Grace was in the shower humming to a song he didn't recognize, Lucas sat in his office with the volume on low. He scrolled through the audio logs from earlier that week. He scrubbed past the moans, the breathy laughter, the whispered, "I've missed you, Colin," and paused on a segment that made his chest turn to ice. It wasn't the infidelity that crushed him. It was what came after. Grace's voice. He's so dull now. Always watching. He asks too many questions. Colin, chuckling. He suspects something? Grace. Probably. But he won't do anything. He's too soft now. He's not the man he used to be. Colin. We'll handle it. Once the divorce hits, we'll push the narrative. He's unstable. You'll get the kids, the house, the portfolio, everything. Grace. Mom's already working on it. The judge owes her favors. We just need to make him look like a threat. Lucas didn't realize his hand had curled into a fist until he saw the blood. His fingernail had dug into his palm hard enough to break the skin. He rewound the recording. Played it again. Unstable. Push the narrative. Get the kids. It wasn't just adultery. It was a setup. Over the next several days, Lucas kept his expression neutral whenever Grace was around. He cooked breakfast, walked the kids to school, played along. She laughed. She kissed him. She touched his shoulder as if nothing was wrong. She wore that same polished smile she always had. But behind it was something different now. Arrogance. Confidence. She believed she had already won. One afternoon, Lucas followed her from a distance as she left their home for a client meeting. She took the white Range Rover she used when she wanted to feel elite. He tailed her on his old Triumph motorcycle, keeping 2 cars behind. She didn't go to Midtown. She didn't even go to the office. She met Colin at a lake house they co-owned under a shell company. He hadn't known about that until 2 nights earlier, when he'd hacked in her cloud-based document vault and found a scanned deed titled H&H Holdings LLC. He watched through binoculars as they embraced on the porch, watched her hand drift down Colin's chest, watched them walk inside, giggling like teenagers. That night, when Grace came home, she was glowing. Lucas looked up from the dinner table as she leaned down and kissed his cheek. "Work was brutal," she said. "I need a glass of wine." "Rough clients?" he asked. She paused just slightly. "The worst." Lucas smiled, slicing into his steak. "Glad you made it back safe." She kissed his cheek again. "Always." He watched her walk upstairs, his face blank. In his office, Lucas added new files to the archive. Video clips, audio snippets, document scans. He cataloged them with clinical precision, evidence logs, time codes, location data. He included transcripts of the calls, text messages, financial transfers, and even Grace's updated will, which conveniently named her mother, Margaret Sterling, as temporary guardian if Lucas were deemed mentally unfit. He stared at the line on the document. In the event of emotional instability, paranoia, or aggression exhibited by Mr. Carlisle, they were planning to paint him as dangerous. And they weren't just playing legal chess. They were trying to erase him. Take his children. Take his name. Take his life apart piece by piece. He stood in the dark hallway that night, watching Grace sleep beside him, her breathing slow and even. The moonlight sliced through the blinds, casting shadows across the floor. She looked peaceful, like someone who believed she was untouchable. But Lucas wasn't broken. He wasn't dull. And he certainly wasn't finished. Chapter 3. The Family Trap. The first time Lucas Carlisle met Margaret Sterling, he saw right through her smile. It was at the engagement dinner, years ago, when Grace still blushed every time she looked at him. Margaret had worn a navy blue pantsuit, diamond brooch perfectly angled over her left collarbone. Her handshake was firm, her gaze colder than the silverware she scrutinized him over. "You're military?" she had asked, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin. "That's admirable. But tell me, Mr. Carlisle, what does a soldier do when he stops fighting?" Lucas had smiled. "He learns how to protect something even more important." She hadn't smiled back. Now, over a decade later, Lucas sat in his office, staring at a blown-up photo of that same woman, her face frozen mid-speech at a recent judicial gala. She looked exactly the same, composed, calculating, ironclad. But beneath the surface, Margaret Sterling wasn't just a judge. She was a political weapon, and she had her sights set on him. Lucas had always known Grace's mother came from a different world. Old money, old power, backroom favors wrapped in designer clothes. Margaret had connections across the state. Law firms, federal agencies, and most terrifying of all, the media. A whisper from her could shape narratives faster than court proceedings ever could. Until recently, Lucas had assumed she disapproved of him for the usual reasons. He didn't have the pedigree. He was too quiet, too tactical, not enough polish for her liking. But this wasn't just dislike. This was war. It started with an anonymous tip. A former clerk who worked under Margaret reached out to Lucas through a burner email. The message was brief and signed, and came with one heavily redacted court memo. "They're not just divorcing you. They're preparing a legal takedown. Mental instability. Paranoia. She's scripting it. Her mother's making the stage." Lucas leaned back in his chair, heart steady despite the implications. He ran the memo through his forensic software, stripping away metadata, cross-referencing signatures, pulling embedded timestamps. The file wasn't fake. It had come directly from Margaret Sterling's chambers, an internal strategy brief titled Custody and Media Mitigation Plan. Carlisle divorce, a section near the bottom caught his eye. Leverage known PTSD from overseas deployment. Encourage behavioral volatility. Secure affidavits from close relatives if necessary. Judicial override available via Circuit 3 recommendation. Lucas exhaled slowly. They weren't just trying to win custody. They were preparing to destroy him. The next day, Lucas visited his old friend Marcus Green, a retired forensic analyst who now ran a quiet surveillance shop out of his garage. It smelled like solder and dust and nostalgia. Marcus looked up from his workbench. Didn't think I'd see you again unless someone dropped a nuclear thumb drive in your mailbox. Lucas handed over a flash drive. I need this scrubbed and decrypted. All traces gone. I also need full metadata extraction. Marcus turned it in his fingers. You in trouble? Not yet, Lucas said. But someone's building the trap. Marcus plugged it in. Whose side of the war? My wife's. And her mother's. Marcus whistled low. Damn. The judge? You sure you want to poke that beehive? I'm not poking, Lucas said. I'm burning it down if I have to. Back home, Lucas remained the picture of calm. He cleaned out the garage with Mason, helped Alyssa with her science project, and kissed Grace on the cheek when she walked through the door. She laughed like nothing was wrong, smiling with that same polished ease she'd perfected. But that night, after she fell asleep, Lucas slipped out to his office again and accessed his secure terminal. He'd started digging into Margaret Sterling's digital footprint. As a federal judge, her records were tight, but Lucas had contacts in low places and an ability to find the threads no one else could. He found a list of sealed case files under Margaret's jurisdiction, 27 in total. 3 had disappeared from public court logs altogether. One involved a teenage DUI that resulted in 3 deaths. The defendant, the son of a wealthy real estate magnate, had walked away with community service and an expunged record. Lucas narrowed his eyes. That was the same magnate whose firm funded Grace's latest real estate venture with Colin. He pulled up campaign donations. Margaret's last judicial re-election was heavily financed by 3 major donors. One of them? Alton Mercer, Colin's father. That was the thread. Grace's affair with Colin wasn't just about sex or business. It was about protection. Colin was connected. His family had bankrolled Margaret. The legal web wasn't incidental. It was engineered. The final straw came a few nights later. Lucas had planted a bug in Grace's favorite makeup mirror, wired to her vanity's lighting fixture. He was reviewing the audio feed while folding laundry in the guest room, earbuds hidden beneath the collar of his shirt. He heard Grace speaking softly into her phone. Grace, it's all set. The papers will be served next week. We claim mental instability, prior combat trauma. He won't see it coming. Colin, what about the kids? Grace, he'll never get them. My mother's pulling strings. The judge is a friend. Worst case, we paint him as a threat. Colin, and if he pushes back? Grace, laughs. Then he gives us everything we need. One outburst in court, and he's done. Lucas dropped the shirt he was folding. His jaw clenched, muscles tense, not with rage, but with focus. They weren't just trying to remove him from the equation. They wanted to trap him into sealing his own fate. Provoke him, corner him, force him to react. And when he did, they'd play the victim. Grace would cry on the witness stand. Margaret would wield her influence behind the scenes. And Colin would walk away with Grace on his arm and Lucas's children in the back seat. Lucas stood in the hallway outside the kids' rooms that night, watching them sleep. Alyssa had kicked off her blankets again. He tucked her in gently. Mason's hand still held the little dinosaur he carried everywhere. Lucas placed it beside his pillow and smoothed the boy's hair. He stared at them for a long time. Then he whispered to the dark. They think I'm soft. They think I'll fold. He turned away, face shadowed in the moonlight. They don't know me at all. Chapter 4. Served at work. Lucas Carlisle liked to begin each day with discipline. A run at 5 o'clock a.m., hot coffee brewed precisely 3 minutes in his AeroPress, followed by silence in his home office while the world was still asleep. By 8 o'clock a.m., he was at Carlisle Risk Solutions, his private security consultancy, organizing case files with surgical precision. This day was no different. At least it began that way. He sat in his glass-paneled corner office, overlooking the downtown skyline, hands gliding over the keyboard as he updated reports on a corporate embezzlement case. Soft jazz hummed in the background. Everything looked calm. That's when he saw him. A man in a navy blue tailored suit, tan briefcase in one hand, smugness etched into his clean-shaven face, strolling toward reception. Lucas watched through the glass. The man leaned against the front desk with rehearsed casualness, flashing a polished grin at Lucas's assistant, Jess. She looked confused, then concerned, before turning toward Lucas's office. She gently opened the door. There's someone here. He says it's urgent. Legal. Lucas's eyes narrowed slightly. Let him in. The man entered with the confidence of someone who believed they had already won. Mr. Lucas Carlisle? He asked, though he clearly already knew. Lucas didn't stand. He simply looked up, calm as a still lake. You're not a client. The man chuckled. No, not today. I'm Frederick Langston. I represent your wife, Grace Carlisle. Lucas said nothing. Frederick reached into his briefcase with exaggerated flair, pulling out a thick envelope. He placed it gently on the desk, like a trophy. You've officially been served, Frederick announced, as if performing for an audience. Divorce proceedings begin immediately. She's seeking full custody of the children, sole ownership of the house, and an equitable split of the marital assets. Which, let's be honest, you'll find is not all that equitable from your side. Lucas's expression didn't change. Frederick leaned forward. To be blunt, she gets everything, including full custody. Oh, and a temporary restraining order. That's standard, of course, given the emotional instability she's reported. Lucas glanced down at the envelope, but didn't touch it. Jess, still standing at the door, looked horrified. Thank you, Jess, Lucas said softly. Close the door behind you. She hesitated, then obeyed, her eyes flicking back at the suited intruder before the door clicked shut. Now, it was just the two of them. Frederick smiled wider. No witty retort? No righteous indignation? Lucas finally rose from his chair, slow and deliberate, walking to a small cabinet in the corner. He opened the top drawer and retrieved a manila envelope, unmarked, sealed, and pristine. He turned and placed it gently on the desk between them. What's this? Frederick asked, still smirking. My response, Lucas said quietly. Frederick raised an eyebrow. Already? You didn't even read? You're not here for information, Lucas interrupted, tone like polished steel. You're here for performance. So consider mine delivered. Frederick chuckled and picked up the envelope. I'll be sure to pass this along to Grace. I assume this is some heartfelt plea? Or maybe a delusional attempt to negotiate. Lucas looked at him, eyes cold, unreadable. No, just truth. Something your clients haven't been very good at handling. Frederick scoffed, but there was a flicker, just a flicker, of unease in his eyes. He tucked the envelope under his arm. Well, Mr. Carlisle, best of luck. You'll need it. And for what it's worth, don't drag this out. The judge assigned to the case is very sympathetic to, well, let's say your wife's circumstances. Lucas walked back to his desk and sat, already turning toward his screen. Are we done here? Frederick hesitated. For the first time, the air shifted. Lucas's silence didn't read like shock. It read like calculation. I suppose we are, Frederick muttered, and made his way out, less confident than when he entered. Lucas didn't look up until he heard the click of the front door shutting behind him. Minutes later, Jess knocked again, her voice uncertain. Boss, what the hell just happened? Lucas leaned back his chair, exhaling slowly. Just the beginning. Jess stepped inside, her concern now mixed with curiosity. He said something about full custody? A restraining order? What's going on? Lucas looked at her for a long second, then offered a calm nod. It's complicated, but I need you to do something for me. Anything. Reach out to Marcus. Tell him to release the packet labeled Sterling Protocol to my legal team. No delays. Her eyes widened. That's serious? More than you know. Jess nodded and stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Lucas turned back to his monitor, eyes scanning the timeline he'd assembled over the past month. Audio files, bank transfers, court filings, recorded conversations. threads upon threads, all leading to one grand orchestration, his public and personal destruction. But now, he had flipped the board. That envelope he handed Frederick wasn't a letter. It was a warning. Inside it were copies of sealed documents, redacted court case files from Margaret Sterling's career, case files tied to bribery, judicial manipulation, and hush-money deals. Not the original evidence, of course. He wasn't foolish, but enough to make someone like Margaret Sterling panic. Enough to send a message. Tread carefully. I know everything. He rose from his desk and walked toward the window. Down on the street below, he watched Frederick hail a cab. The man looked back once, brow furrowed. Lucas sipped his coffee, unbothered. He had taken the first hit. Publicly. Unexpectedly. But war wasn't about the opening shot. It was about who finished standing when the smoke cleared. Chapter 5. Digging into the darkness. 2 months earlier, the glow of the computer monitor was the only light in Lucas Carlisle's home office. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the cooling fans and the occasional click of his mouse. It was long past midnight, but Lucas wasn't tired. Not anymore. The shock of betrayal had passed. What remained now was precision. Focus. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms as he reviewed the encrypted files he'd been decoding. A week ago, this investigation had been solely about Grace's affair with Colin Mercer. That wound still throbbed in his chest, but it had led him somewhere deeper, more sinister. Grace's betrayal wasn't just about love. It was political, calculated, strategic. She didn't just want him gone, she wanted him erased. The surveillance equipment Lucas had planted, discreet mics in her home office, GPS on her car, signal interceptors tied to her burner phones, had led him down a trail of half-spoken threats and hush strategy meetings. Grace, Colin, and her mother, Margaret Sterling, a federal judge with far-reaching influence, weren't just planning a divorce. They were setting a trap. But Margaret had made a mistake, one that Lucas, a former military intelligence officer turned private security consultant, could smell from miles away. She had secrets, big ones, and secrets always left trails. It began with a casual name drop during a recorded dinner conversation between Grace and Colin. "Don't worry," Grace had whispered, swirling her wine. "Mom handled worse. Remember the Michaels case?" Colin chuckled. "That one with the 3 fatalities? You were still in college then, right? I saw the entire cleanup. Sealed records, gag orders, rewritten reports. You'd be shocked what justice looks like when it's in your family's hands." The Michaels case. Lucas had written that phrase down that night, almost absently, but it kept gnawing at him. A day later, he started digging. Public records? Nothing. Sealed by judicial order. Local news? Sparse, just an obituary for a young couple and their friend killed in a DUI on a rainy night over a decade ago. But when Lucas dug deeper, using private law enforcement databases, favors from old contacts in the FBI, and a few borderline illegal exploits, he cracked open something horrifying. The accident had happened 13 years ago. A drunk 19-year-old named Chase Langley, the son of a powerful industrialist and longtime donor to judicial campaigns, had plowed his luxury SUV into a Honda Civic, killing 3 college students inside. The case had briefly made local headlines until it disappeared. No charges were ever filed. No trial. Just silence. Lucas found court dockets with redacted entries and dead-end paper trails. The presiding judge? Margaret Sterling, Grace's mother. He stared at her name on the court summary, fists clenched. It wasn't incompetence. It was intentional. Using his connections, Lucas secured partial transcripts, bits and pieces from the original inquest. A key witness had recanted their testimony 2 days after filing it. The arresting officer had been reassigned. A medical examiner's toxicology report had been replaced with a sanitized version that claimed no intoxication. It reeked of a full-scale cover-up. The final breakthrough came when Lucas posed as a freelance investigator and interviewed Olivia Corman, a retired paralegal who had briefly worked in Margaret's chambers at the time. They met in a tiny cafe on the outskirts of the city. Olivia was in her 70s now, with sharp eyes and a voice that wavered between guilt and caution. "I remember it like it was yesterday," she said quietly, fingers trembling around her coffee cup. 3 kids dead. Just gone. The boy who hit them, Chase, came in with a lawyer team fit for the Supreme Court. And Margaret handled the suppression? Lucas asked, voice calm. Olivia nodded slowly. We were told it was for the good of the community, that the Langley boy had potential, and that prison would waste his life. She had lunch with his father 2 days after the crash. When she came back, everything changed. Did she alter official documents? No, Olivia whispered, eyes darting. She had others do it. Probation officers, clerks, even the city prosecutor. All pressured. I saw one of them cry in the hallway. But no one would stand up to her. Margaret was untouchable. Lucas leaned forward. Can you testify to this? Her lips tightened. I could, but I won't. I'm old, Mr. Carlisle. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in court or worse. But if I were to subpoena the digital logs of those filings, they'd be wiped. Unless you know where the backups are. The judicial archive from that year? Stored off-grid in the state repository. Only accessible with a federal-level clearance. Lucas smiled faintly. Lucky for me, I'm good with locks. 2 nights later, under a moonless sky, Lucas slipped into the secure record facility, posing as a federal systems technician during a routine overnight audit. He bypassed biometric entry points using cloned ID data he'd acquired years ago during a Homeland Security contract. Within the hour, he had what he needed: hard drives, email correspondence backups, and metadata logs proving document tampering by Judge Margaret Sterling. Each file was like a nail in her career's coffin. Each name connected to the cover-up was tagged, labeled, archived. He spent the next week assembling a meticulous, time-stamped evidence dossier. The DUI incident report, the falsified autopsy, the recanted witness statement with handwriting inconsistencies, and Margaret's communication with the Langley legal team. He stored it all in an encrypted drive, made multiple backups, and sent one to a secure legal contact in Washington with instructions. Release to the media and DOJ if anything happens to me. By the time Grace's lawyer swaggered into his office with divorce papers, Lucas had already planted the seeds of their downfall. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. Measured, cold, and entirely inescapable. Chapter 6. Cracks in the Armor. The night had settled over the city like a velvet shroud, the streets quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren fading into the darkness. In his dimly lit study, Lucas Carlisle sat rigid, his phone balanced between ear and shoulder as he typed furiously on his laptop. His eyes were sharp, his mind racing, but his voice remained calm as a predator sizing up its prey. The first message came as a piercing ring that sliced through the silence. Lucas, please, this isn't what you think. We can fix this. You don't have to do this. It was Grace. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he read her frantic texts, each one dripping with desperation. She called twice, left voicemails, and sent a dozen messages, some pleading, some veiled threats. The second call came moments later. Lucas, please listen to me. I'm begging you. Don't ruin us. The kids need their family. Her voice cracked, betraying the cool facade she usually wore. But Lucas had heard that voice before, in private conversations, whispered lies, and betrayal. He finally replied, his voice low, steady, and unyielding. Grace, I know everything. Your plans, Colin's plans, and your mother's. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Al, what do you mean? I'm done being the fool. Grace was silent for a moment, then a whisper. Please, Lucas, don't make this worse. Before Lucas could respond, another call came through, this time from Colin Mercer, Grace's business partner, and her lover. Carlisle, Colin barked, his voice laced with rage. You have no idea what you're playing with. This ends tonight. Walk away, or I swear I'll make sure you never see your children again. Lucas leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You threatened me over the phone, Colin? I thought you were smarter than that. Colin scoffed. I'm smarter than you. You're a man clinging to the past, to your shattered marriage. But you don't realize the storm coming. Lucas's fingers tightened around the phone. The only storm I see is the one about to wash you all away. He hung up, his pulse steady. The phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown number. The text read simply, Federal agents are en route. Your secrets are unraveling. A cold smile crept across Lucas's lips. Grace's plan had just begun to crumble. Suddenly, the doorbell rang sharply. Lucas wasn't expecting visitors. He glanced at the clock, midnight. Hesitating only for a moment, he moved quietly to the front door, peering through the peephole. A black sedan was parked across the street, and a man in a tailored suit held a badge. Federal agent. Lucas opened the door without hesitation. "Agent McAllister?" he asked. The agent nodded, holding up credentials. "Mr. Carlisle, we received an anonymous tip. We need to ask you a few questions." Lucas stepped aside, motioning them in. As the agent settled into his living room, Lucas's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Grace's mother, Judge Margaret Sterling. Her voice was icy, controlled. "Lucas, we need to talk. You don't understand the consequences if this escalates." He smiled a cold, knowing smile. "Oh, Margaret, I understand perfectly. Your reign is over." Margaret's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You're playing a dangerous game. I can ruin you. I'm not the one who's going to be ruined." Lucas's voice was steel. The line went dead. Lucas leaned back and exhaled deeply. He was in control now. The night stretched on with a barrage of calls and messages. Grace's panic grew with each beep. Colin's threats multiplied, and Margaret's legal team scrambled behind scenes. But Lucas's confidence never wavered. He had the evidence, the proof, and the law was starting to catch up with his enemies. Tonight, the cracks in their armor had finally begun to show. Chapter 7. The Non-Negotiable Deal. Lucas sat in the cold, sterile conference room of a downtown office tower, the low hum of the city filtering through the thick glass walls. Across the table sat the three people who had tried to dismantle his life: Grace, Colin, and Margaret Sterling. The tension was so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. Grace, usually so composed and commanding, now fidgeted nervously with the hem of her blouse, avoiding Lucas's steady gaze. Colin sat rigid, jaw clenched, fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the polished surface. Margaret, ever the matriarch, wore a mask of calm authority, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Lucas folded his hands and spoke with measured calm, the kind that brooked no argument. "I'm giving you one chance to end this quietly." Grace glanced at Margaret, her eyes pleading. "Lucas, we can work this out. There's no need for hostility." He cut her off. "Hostility? You betrayed me. You planned to erase me. And you thought you could use your mother's power to do it." Margaret's voice was icy. "My position as a judge does not give you license to threaten my family." "I'm not threatening," Lucas replied, voice unwavering. "I'm stating facts. Here are my terms." He slid a thick folder across the table toward Margaret. "Grace drops the divorce proceedings immediately and signs over full custody of the children to me." Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible." Lucas's gaze hardened. "The law doesn't favor deception and manipulation. You've been using your position and your family's influence to deceive everyone. That ends now." Colin leaned forward, voice sharp. "And what about me? You think you can just walk away with my business?" Lucas smiled thinly. "Colin, you'll sell your shares to a shell company I own. Fair market value. Cash in hand. Walk away clean." Colin's jaw twitched. "You're insane. Or I'm prepared," Lucas said flatly. Margaret's eyes flicked down to the folder, then back up. "And me? What's your demand?" Lucas met her stare evenly. "You resign immediately. No exceptions. You prepare to face the legal consequences for your involvement in the cover-up." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have no proof." Lucas tapped the folder. "Proof enough to start a federal investigation. Enough to ruin every last one of you." Silence filled the room like a heavy fog. Grace's voice broke through, shaky but resolute. "And if we refuse?" Lucas's expression was cold steel. "Then I release everything, to the press, to the feds, and the public." Colin's hand slammed onto the table. "You destroy us all? Even yourself?" "Even if it costs me everything," Lucas said firmly. "Because justice is non-negotiable." The room was still, the weight of Lucas's words sinking in. Grace swallowed hard, glancing between the folder and Lucas's unyielding gaze. Margaret finally spoke, voice low and dangerous. "You think this ends here? You're playing a dangerous game, Lucas. But we'll see who breaks first." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "I already know." He rose from his chair, gathering the folder with slow, deliberate movements. "Take your time to decide. But remember, I'm not bluffing." As he turned toward the door, Grace's whispered plea stopped him. "Lucas, please." He paused, looking back once more. "This isn't personal. It's necessary." With that, he stepped out, leaving them to their choice and the inevitable consequences that awaited. Chapter 8. Crumbling Dynasty. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick blinds of Lucas Carlisle's living room when his phone buzzed incessantly. The relentless stream of notifications painted a clear picture. The empire built by Grace, Colin, and Margaret was finally unraveling. He sat back in his leather chair, eyes scanning headlines from every major news outlet. The headlines screamed betrayal, corruption, and scandal. Margaret Sterling's name was plastered everywhere. Former judge now under investigation for gross misconduct and obstruction of justice. The press had dug deep into the decades-old DUI cover-up, tearing down the once untouchable matriarch of the Sterling family with a ferocity Lucas barely dared to hope for. He leaned forward, a faint smile curling at the edge of his lips as he read the exposés detailing Margaret's secret deals and the tragic deaths that had been swept under the rug. The carefully constructed facade of power and respectability was crumbling fast. A knock at the door pulled Lucas from the headlines. It was his daughter, Anna, eyes wide with concern but filled with hope. "Dad," she whispered, "I heard about Mom on the news. Are we going to be okay?" Lucas crouched down, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to be more than okay, sweetheart. We're going to be free." Anna nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling on her young shoulders. "What about Mom and Colin?" "They're facing the consequences of their choices," Lucas said. "And Colin? Well, he's in trouble too." Just then, Lucas's phone vibrated again. This time, it was an encrypted message from one of his trusted contacts in the financial sector. He opened it cautiously. "All of Colin's financial accounts have been frozen. His assets seized. Your shell company now controls the majority of his shares, clean and legally," the message read. Lucas's smile widened. Quietly, methodically, over the past weeks, he had maneuvered behind the scenes, acquiring critical holdings, freezing bank accounts, and cutting off Colin's financial lifelines without drawing attention. The empire Colin thought untouchable was slipping through his fingers. The phone rang before Lucas could process the message fully. It was Colin's number, but the voice on the other end was strained, desperate. "Lucas, listen, we can work something out. I'm willing to negotiate. Let's not destroy what we built," Colin pleaded, his bravado shattered. Lucas's reply was cold and precise. "You lost the right to negotiate the moment you betrayed your family." The line went dead. Across town, Grace was facing her own battles. The prestigious real estate firm she'd nurtured for years was hemorrhaging clients. Investors were pulling out as the scandal surrounding her family's corruption spread like wildfire. Her phone was a barrage of angry calls and terse messages from board members and key clients. "Grace, we need to talk," one said. "Your credibility is at stake." She paced her office, fingers trembling, her polished mask cracked and crumbling. At the peak of her panic, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lucas's number. She hesitated, then answered, voice brittle. "Lucas." "Grace," Lucas said evenly. "Your world is falling apart. You have two choices. Face it now, or watch it burn completely." There was a long silence, then a whisper. "What do you want?" "Everything you promised, and more. Your power, your money, your lies, they're gone." Grace's breath hitched. "You won't win." "Watch me," Lucas said. As the call ended, Lucas stood and looked out over the city skyline. The empire they built, once so strong, so untouchable, was crumbling beneath the weight of its own corruption and betrayal. He had dismantled it piece by piece, with patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Tonight, the dynasty that sought to destroy him lay in ruins. Chapter 9. The Final Blow. The conference room was bathed in the harsh, unforgiving glow of fluorescent lights. A polished mahogany table stretched between Lucas and the others, the last battlefield where years of lies, betrayal, and broken trust would come to a decisive end. Grace sat stiffly, her posture brittle like a carefully constructed statue about to crack. Colin was beside her, tense, but maintaining his usual mask of arrogance. Margaret Sterling stood slightly behind, her regal presence diminished by the weight of recent events. Lucas's gaze was steady and unwavering. The air around him seemed to solidify with resolve. He laid out a final stack of documents, the divorce settlement papers, custody agreements, and the transfer deeds for business shares, all meticulously prepared and favoring his terms. "Sign here," Lucas said, pointing to the bottom of the first page. His voice was calm, but carried the undeniable edge of finality. Grace's hands trembled as she picked up the pen. She glanced at Margaret, whose eyes silently urged her to hold on just a little longer. But the cracks had grown too deep, the pressure too great. Slowly, reluctantly, Grace began to sign, page after page, one after another. Each signature was a surrender, a quiet admission of defeat. When the last page was signed and the papers collected, Lucas leaned forward, folding his hands. "But before we end this," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "there's something you should know." Grace looked up, confusion flickering across her face. Colin's smirk faltered, suspicion rising like a dark cloud. "I intercepted a plan," Lucas continued. "A plan Colin cooked up behind both your backs. While you were scheming here, he was plotting to flee the country with another woman and take all the company's funds." The room fell silent. Colin's jaw clenched visibly. Grace's eyes widened, shock and pain mingling in her expression. Lucas reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He placed it in front of them. Bank transfers, flight reservations, encrypted messages. All proof that Colin was ready to disappear, with the money and without you. Colin's facade cracked. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly," Lucas said sharply. "I traced the transactions, froze the accounts, and ensured he can't move a single cent. Your last hope, Colin's support and protection, is gone." Grace's breath hitched. She looked as if the ground beneath her had crumbled completely. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you didn't deserve to know until you realized the truth," Lucas replied coldly. "You were a pawn in a much bigger game." Colin slammed his fist on the table, voice shaking with rage. "This isn't over, Lucas." Lucas stood and faced them both, his voice firm and resolute. "For you it is." He turned toward the door but paused, glancing back once more. "Remember this moment, when your empire fell, not from outside, but from the betrayal within." With that, he walked out, leaving behind shattered illusions and a silence heavier than any words could carry. Chapter 10. Aftermath and Resolve. The morning light spilled gently across the living room, where Lucas sat with his children, Anna and Owen. Their laughter filled the space, a sound so rare and precious that Lucas felt it echo in his heart long after it faded. For the first time in years, peace wasn't a distant dream, but a tangible presence. The dark storm that had consumed his life was finally over. Owen tossed a pillow at Anna, who shrieked and ducked behind the couch. Lucas chuckled, watching the carefree moment as though it belonged to someone else, a happier version of himself. His gaze softened as he caught Anna's bright eyes and Owen's infectious grin. "You ready for school, champ?" Lucas asked Owen, ruffling his hair. "Yep, and I'm going to ace my math test," Owen declared confidently. Anna grabbed her backpack, grinning. "I'm going to tell Mom all about my art project." Lucas smiled, the name still bittersweet on his tongue. His phone buzzed on the side table. He glanced at the screen. An encrypted message from one of his contacts, case updates on corruption he had helped expose. Lucas's world had changed. No longer was he just a family man. He had stepped into a new role, one of a silent guardian, fighting injustice where it lurked. Outside, news vans and reporters still swirled around the scandal that had dismantled the Sterling dynasty. Grace's name was synonymous with disgrace. The once powerful real estate mogul was now a pariah, shunned by society, deserted by former allies, and struggling to reclaim any shred of dignity. Lucas had learned that Grace's luxurious mansion had been sold under duress, assets frozen, and her business licenses revoked. The fall was swift and absolute. Across town, Margaret Sterling awaited her trial from house arrest, her once formidable presence diminished to a shadow. The headlines detailed the court's harsh rebuke of her corruption and abuse of power, promising justice for the lives destroyed by her cover-up. Colin Mercer had vanished from public view entirely. Word was that he had fled the country, penniless and betrayed by those he once trusted. His name was erased from business circles, his reputation in tatters. Lucas sat back in his chair, steeling himself for the future. His phone rang, a new client on the line, a woman whose husband had just vanished, leaving a trail of lies and deceit. Lucas's voice was calm but resolute as he listened. "I understand. We'll find the truth," he assured her. His work was no longer about protecting his own family. It was about protecting others from the pain he knew all too well. The betrayals, the lies, the shattered lives, they all fueled his drive. Anna climbed into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Dad, will you always be there for us?" Lucas kissed her forehead. "Always, sweetheart, no matter what." In that moment, Lucas knew that though the battles had been brutal, the scars would heal. He had lost much, but gained something far greater: clarity, purpose, and a new mission to ensure that no one else would suffer as he had. As the sun climbed higher, Lucas stood and opened the front door, breathing in the fresh air of a new beginning. The silent guardian was ready.